Of KDKR programming do not necessarily reflect the views of this station, its management, or staff.
Prudent Money with Bob Brooks is sponsored by the Prudent Money Foundation on 91.3.
Well, new rules could mean buyers with good credit are paying more in fees than those with bad credit. Today we're going to take a look. Stay tuned for Prudent Money. Afternoon. This is Bob Brooks, and you are listening to the Prudent Money Radio Show. Thank you so much for joining me today. You know I do appreciate it. Well, are you about to be penalized for having good credit? Today, mortgage consultant and Prudent Money contributor Mark Pfeiffer is here to give us his take. Mark, how are you today?
I'm doing great, Mr. Bob. Thanks for having me as always.
Now, of course, you got to keep in mind the media can take a story to look one way when it really means something else just to get those clicks. However, this story has had some people asking some questions. Talk a little bit about the perception of higher fees and good credit versus really what's going on.
Yeah, absolutely. And we've certainly talked about clickbait before, and you know what's real, what isn't real, and how things can be spun. But the reality is, this is actually true. So Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, they are, you know, the kind of the industry giants and quasi-owned by the government. Well, they've just now passed it so that borrowers with higher credit scores suddenly will now pay higher rates than they could have, would have, should have about 30 days ago. And meanwhile, borrowers with lower credit scores won't pay quite as much. So imagine this. Somebody with really good credit, somebody with marginal credit, there's a gap. That gap just got narrower. So it really is almost like a tax on the higher credit individuals. It has nothing to do with income or nothing to do with loan amounts. It's just if somebody has higher credit, they're not going to get quite as sweet of a deal, and somebody with marginal credit is going to get a little bit better deal. So that's just fact, and it has not. It's interesting that it happened now in this timing in this market, but that's just where things are today. Well,
being in the business, did you get warning of this, or did you just kind of, knowing how the government works, did you just find out?
It kind of just came. I won't say came out of nowhere, but as a greater whole, I mean, certainly there's got to be somebody behind the scenes making things happen. I'm sure there's some counsel, but as a greater general public, mortgage public, with mortgage professionals, it really was just a few weeks of a heads up. And this is on the tails of there's also going to be additional adjustments for those with higher debt ratios. They're going to start paying higher interest rates. So
yeah,
higher
that makes
debt ratio
sense.
means, so it's a risk. So now you got that double whammy to where somebody that could have good credit pays their bills all the time. So now they're getting a little bit higher rate because of that. And if their debt ratios are maxed, because maybe there's only one person on the loan and the other spouse isn't for some reason, well, now they could even have a slightly higher rate on top of that. So there's been a lot of changes in the last 30, 60 days in the mortgage world for sure.
So can you give us an example? I hate to take it down to this kind of detail, but I'm very curious because this just does not make you've actually come up with a story here, or we came up with a story that makes no sense to me whatsoever. So you've got Joe. Let's say Joe's got bad credit or lower credit, and you got Bill. Let's say Bill has great credit. Talk about kind of before this new rule goes into effect, and then after this new rule goes into effect, if you can. And we're just playing with numbers here.
Yeah, so just kind of generically speaking, right? So if somebody says, Bill with good credit, Bill comes in, wants to buy a home. Before all this went down, let's just say bought a home 2-3 months ago. Let's just say the rate of X. Whatever you want to pick, doesn't matter. So rate of X. Well, now Bill might be paying a rate of X.1. So at the end of the day, it's not this like earth-shattering difference, but it is a tax on Bill for having good credit, right? So if he puts down 5-10% good credit and he now pays a 0.1 higher interest rate, look, it may only be $40 a month, and it depends on what the rate is in the loan amount. But let's just say it's $30, $40, $50 a month. That's not the end of the world, but when you figure that could be over time, every single payment, that ends up being a lot of money. And likewise, Joe, the lesser credit individual, Joe's rate just went from whatever it would have been. Why? Because they don't start at the same rate. The good credit folks still get the better credit, still get the better interest rate. But where Joe, bad credit person, or let's say marginal, not bad, but just marginal credit, could have had a rate of Y, but then all of a sudden now he's Y minus 0.1. So he gets to save the 30, 40, 50 bucks a month, as opposed to the good credit person paying it extra. So it really is backwards. When you think of mortgages and lending and just banking in general, you typically don't want to punish those with the good credit, and that's ultimately what just happened. It's just become a tax, so to speak, on the good credit individuals.
So let me ask you this. Is Joe the one with the bad credit and Bill the one with the good credit? So let's say Joe, is he getting a better deal when it's all said and done than Bob is getting penalized? I hope that makes sense.
Yeah, so I'll say this. It's not the two are not competing with each other, but the lesser credit person just got a slightly better deal than they would have 30 days ago. Good credit's still going to have lower interest rates, right? So it still pays to have good credit. Let's make no mistake about that. Good credit scores still mean better rates. It just means what your rate would have been 60 days ago is now going to be a touch higher today because of this new adjustment. So it's still going to be significantly better than good credit. Still going to have a lower, better financing profile, but it's just not as sweet as it once was 60 days ago.
So is it fair to ask whose idea this was?
I'll let you decide whose idea it was, Bob. I don't know. I just know it's in effect right now. How about that?
And you have nobody has said, nobody is in an article and published or anything come down from the higher ups says this is why this is happening.
Yeah, I think nothing that I would speak to that I can say with certainty here. I've seen all kinds of articles, as you can imagine, especially being an election year and all this other stuff. There's all that, and maybe it's true, maybe it's not true, right? I don't know the validity of where the origin came from and the reasons behind it. I just know that again, the mortgage world is now just having to deliver the message. And here's the deal: to the layman, to the person who didn't know any better, if somebody's never seen this article and they call this 90 days ago versus now, and if a mortgage person doesn't bring it up, they wouldn't have known. No, they wouldn't have known. They would have never known, right? If your rate would have been it's just 0.1, they just never would have known that's why. So unless it gets explained to them, and then of course there comes emotion with that. So no matter who you are, for the most part, somebody's going to get upset if they get charged more than they could have or should have. Right? On the other hand, there's some recipients here that say, "Oh, cool, good for me. My scores aren't so great. I had a hiccup with a divorce or medical reasons or job loss or something. Good for me to know that I'm not getting beat up as much as I would have been." But again, they only know that if somebody explains it to them, because it's not so significant that folks are really going to notice if you're not paying attention. But again, it's just real information. The articles out there are going to tell you it's, one party doing something to the other party, or, the need and reason. But it's hard to fathom, but I don't understand the reason for it. Meaning I'd understand if they just tax somebody, right? Like, hey, here's a worse, higher credit. We're taxing you more because of this. Doesn't matter. But then you give it away to somebody else that has lesser credit. Just kind of, in theory, it's going to be a net zero. So I'm not sure why you do it. Okay,
so here's the soundbite. Are you ready for the soundbite? Biden administration makes it easier for people with bad credit to buy a home. That's the soundbite, yep. Right?
And it's not untrue, because if you had marginal credit, you now don't have to qualify because you get a 0.1 better rate or whatever that translates to in a rate. So is it, quote, easier? Sure, it's easier if you got a lower rate. So it's not an untrue statement whether or not they deservingly get that credit, or whether you want to call it, a positive or negative. It's how do you want to read that? I can see some folks reading that saying, man, good for them, and others saying, man, I'm shaking my fist in the air because that's a terrible thing. So it depends on your point of view, but the reality is it's true. Somebody now gets a little bit better rate for the marginal credit.
I would have felt better about this story had you said, yeah, we were told 4 months ago, and we've been building kind of to see the details that are going to come out, and it's a big percentage jump. It's not this small increase or decrease. And
if you look at the heat map, right? So there's, and if anybody listening, if they're sitting in front of a computer or in front of your phone, just Google, just go to Google Fannie Mae LLPA, right? So Fannie Mae LLPA. LLPA stands for Loan Level Price Adjustment. And on page two, you can see, like, if somebody puts down 10% with this credit score or puts down 25% with this credit score, and you can get it's just a table, and you can see how that adjusts. It's like right in the middle of that table is where things just got jumbled, to where the better credit suddenly just all those went up just 0.125 or 0.25, like just enough. It's just this interesting thing. So yeah, Bob, to your point, like, I don't know what input. I imagine they've had some, right? There's some input where some of the, the governing bodies of the mortgage world, I'm sure, were consulted. I don't have an answer that I can give you that I'm satisfied with as to why it needed to be done and what it ultimately accomplishes. I don't quite get it. So I'm not a very good guest for you today on your show because I don't have a good answer for you.
No, I think it really illustrates. I'm really dumbfounded. I just can't believe that that they. Okay. Well, anyway. Well, okay. There you go. There's your answer. We'll leave it.
Yeah. And again, if they said, "Hey, we're taking," like, if they taxed, right? If they just said, "Hey, we're going to somehow get some money from this," right? If they said, "Hey, Fannie and Freddie are in trouble. We need money, so we're charging more," I at least understand it. If they said, "Hey, we're going to create some extra revenue, and we're going to then use it to provide home buying classes for the underserved and underprivileged," great, I understand it. I just don't have that. I don't, and again, maybe I'm just ignorant and haven't seen it. I just don't understand the purpose, I guess, behind it. So, yeah, again, is what it is at this point.
Yeah, and this funny thing is, you can't even call it socialism.
You can't. I don't even know what to call it. It's a weird one.
Okay, well, enough of that. Let's move on. What about, I think that we've never really gone through this, but I think in light of this, it makes sense now for everybody to make sure that they're not paying too much in fees, where they could be paying less in fees someplace else. So I do know enough to be dangerous, Mark, and I know that there are fees that everybody pays. There's really no adjustment to them. They're across the board. Then there's fees that are adjustable, where maybe one company makes more money over another company, that kind of thing. Kind of go through that with us a little bit.
Yeah, so you're right. Like, some things, here's what I'll tell folks. When you go shopping for a mortgage and you get this, like, big breakdown of all the fees, and what's interesting is they're all fairly reasonable and normal when you look at them independently, but then when you put them all together and it aggregates to thousands of dollars, like, holy smokes. So the reality is, if you're shopping lenders, just lenders specifically, there's really only about two things in terms of fees on the worksheet that the lender even controls. Everything else, right? The title company gets picked by the contracts, right? So that's between the buyer and the sellers. Insurance, the homeowner picks the insurance company. Title policy, it's regulated by the state of Texas. So when you figure all those third-party things are going to be the same, the only thing you really need to shop for are points and then the fancy word, origination charges. So the reason why people get hung up on this is origination charges, the fancy word for the lender fees, is because a lender can call something processing, underwriting, admin, all these things. But every lender in America has to call all the aggregate, the sum of those fees. They have to call them their origination charges. So if somebody's shopping for a mortgage, you can call up to Bank X or Mortgage Company Y and say, "Hey guys, what are your origination charges?" That's the fancy word for just saying, what are all your fees that you have as a lender that come into play? Are those negotiable? Maybe. Right? If somebody says, "Oh, I can waive $100, $200, maybe they can, maybe they can't. That varies from lender to lender. The other is points. And this is where I don't understand how folks miss it, Bob, but they do. And there's a really big mortgage company that advertises a lot of times on Super Bowl and other TV. They spend a big ad spend. I don't know how they convince folks to either miss it or to somehow pretend it's not important, but there are a lot of points that can be charged, and they may not always be justified. I've seen 2.5, 3.5 points by comparison where another lender is going to charge none or 0.5%. So I think that's the biggest part where folks just need to realize, when you be an informed consumer, feel free to call around, but know what you're asking. And it's how many points and what are your origination charges. Those are the two best things, and interest rate being the third. Those three things, rate, points, and origination charges. If they ask those three questions, I think they should have a pretty good foundation for shopping mortgages and seeing what's real and what's not real.
Now, were you talking about the nonprofit mortgage company that advertises that they're not in the business to make money; they're in the business to give good deals, and they're a 501c3 or something? Of course,
I always tell folks, I go, look, it's truly, for one company in particular, they are really a monster marketing company. They just happen to do mortgages. I don't consider them a mortgage company because I don't consider them true competition. But holy smokes, they are darn good at marketing, and they do a fantastic job. But it costs a ton of money to do that. So I always tell folks, how does that make sense? The company that spends the most money, how are they going to give you the lowest and best? So I know we've had that joke, Bob. Nobody's doing something for free, and they got to make their money somehow.
Well, I think that the point that you're talking about is that, once again, I'll say what you just said. Nobody is doing it for free, even though they can tell you that there's no cost, no fees, it's just not true. I mean, because nobody's doing it for free. So everybody makes money on those things, and it's too bad, because you're right. It is a marketing machine. Absolutely. And you know what's even sadder is that there's nobody that's truly regulating that.
They claim that there is, and I don't want to get in trouble, and I'm not poking, but I couldn't agree more. I mean, and I appreciate what the governing bodies try to do is make things transparent and easy, but as well as I do, Bob, like people just don't understand what they're looking at, and every company can do it a little different. Sure, there's one uniform form, but it's just so tough, and that's why we keep stressing: work with somebody you know, like, and trust. Right? If somebody's had a good experience with somebody, use that person. Because there's a lot of good folks out there, and there's also a lot of folks that aren't good. I'm not saying that they're not good people. I'm just saying they just may not be good at mortgages. So work with somebody you know, like, and trust, and do your homework. But at the end of the day, again, finding the right company with the right person. It's not just a company; it's a person who's on the other side of that phone. Because you can get two different experiences from the same company if you talk to two different people. So find that person you want to work with, and just put your faith and confidence in somebody you trust.
This is Bob Brooks, and you are listening to the Prudent Money Radio Show. Thank you so much for joining me today. Mark Pfeiffer is here, as he is every month, to talk everything mortgages and real estate. So if you want more information on Mark, mortgagemark.com is where you need to go. Let's talk a little bit about and if you were sitting here with me, you would watch my air quotes come up, banking crisis.
Right.
And I'm not even going to start on that, but the quote unquote banking crisis that we are apparently still having, I guess. How is that the presence of banks going insolvent? Only two or three have gone insolvent, I think. What has that done to rates? It's just kind of like the optic. Has the optic affected rates? What's been happening?
Yeah, good question. So it's affected rates in this way. When SVB, with Silicon Valley Bank, had their issues and they first hit the headlines, the optics, right, is that there may be this crisis, the next shoe to drop, the next mortgage meltdown coming, whatever it is, right? So any fear and uncertainty, when there is fear and uncertainty, you'll often see a flight to quality. So stock market may sell off, and then that may go to something safe like a treasury, or maybe to a mortgage-backed security. So we certainly saw a very big benefit, and have since, with the uncertainty of the unknown. We have seen rates improve because of that. They went from what would have been, rates were in the high sixes to suddenly now low sixes and even fives in some examples. So we've seen a pickup or an improvement in pricing because of just the unknown. So the market is not because of the banks went out of business. It's just the uncertainty it creates a flight to quality. So we've certainly seen that. From an underwriting perspective and things like that, honestly, it's kind of just business as usual. What I have found is our competition. A lot of the smaller banks, credit unions. We talked about this in shows past. At the end of last year, like, credit unions were actually like formidable opponents. They usually haven't historically been that big in the mortgage world. Well, suddenly now those outlets are disappearing and getting turned off. I got buddies that work for banks, and they're saying, man, we suddenly just close the portfolio. Like they're no longer getting as aggressive on the mortgage front. So as a traditional mortgage banker like myself, great. Like it's just more for us, right? To help to see what we can do. But as far as the lending, I haven't really seen any contraction from the normal mortgage outlets, and so far it's just business as usual, and the rates have improved, which everybody enjoys.
So are you surprised at all? I mean, looking at the 10-year Treasury rate, which is a good benchmark, it really hasn't done much. It's done more a little bit to the downside than the upside. Are you surprised that mortgage rates have not moved a little bit further down than they have?
Not yet. So I've been saying this, and I know you're on our weekly video distribution. So once a week we'll send out the video, and for the last 3 months, since basically February-ish, January, February, we've had May 10th. So this week. So May 10th has been circled, and why? Inflation's the biggest driver for our rates right now. If inflation starts showing a meaningful decline, then our rates will start to come down. So I do project, and I'll go out and say, and again, I can be wrong, guys. I don't have the crystal ball, but it wouldn't surprise me if we see rates in the mid to low fives, maybe low fives, but mid fives. I feel good about sometime in the next 6 to 12 months. We could see them by the end of this year. Why? Because starting this Wednesday, I do think we're going to start seeing more meaningful. This is the start, it's not the destination. But it's going to be, I think, month over month, we're going to start seeing inflation come down in a meaningful way. And you might ask, why do you think that? Well, for the PCE and CPI, housing and the equivalent of housing, like rents and things like that, is such a huge component of that it is a lagging indicator. So rents are no longer going up like they did 20% month over month. It's just the problem is now those rents that were signed last year are finally coming due and getting renewed or now leased out, and that's when inflation is going to show that it's coming down. So I do think this Wednesday is going to be a big report, and I think month over month for the next handful of months we'll see inflation come down, and therefore you will then see, I think, mortgage rates comes down and the Treasury and all that's going to help us out. So I'm not totally surprised, but I think we're getting to the part where rates are going to be getting better soon.
This is Bob Brooks, and you are listening to the Prudent Money Radio Show. If you want more information about Mark, go to mortgagemark.com. Mark, always great to have you on. Look forward to talking to you next month.
Yes, sir. Thanks for having me, Bob. Bye-bye.
This is Bob Brooks, and you are listening to the Prudent Money Radio Show. And listen, if you've not done so yet, you need to go see the new prudentmoney.com. We've redone the entire site. Go check it out, and let me know what you think. A lot of resources at the site, and just like I said, we just got through kind of doing it slowly, but we got it all put together, and I think that you'll like it. So go check it out at prudentmoney.com. Well, it'll be interesting to see these new next inflation rates come out, because I would agree, I'm not so sure they're going to go down, but I would agree that this is kind of it's going to do one way or the other in a little bit larger move. So we'll see. It's very out of balance, if anything at all, and it's really tough to say which way it's going to go. But we'll keep you up to date on that as it happens. If you got a question for me, please go to the website at prudentmoney.com and send it in, because we are all out of time. Till we do meet again next time, keep the faith and have a great rest of the day.
That's all the time we have for today. Questions or comments for Bob, or to find out more great information like what you've just heard, visit www.prudentmoney.com. Be sure to join Bob Brooks again for the next edition of Prudent Money.